In this video, I'll show how to create a graph out of the data that you may recover from the Arduino as part of your Heatsink experiment. Here I've already gathered data using two temperature sensors on the Arduino, printed to the serial monitor with a comma between them. Then I imported them into Excel and used the data options up here to go from text to columns so that it separated that into two nice columns for us. Like we did in the previous project. Next, I'm going to make a graph of both of these so they're graphed on the same chart so we can compare the difference between them. So I'm selecting both columns here simply by clicking and dragging over the two letters, then going up to the ribbon in the Insert options and looking at recommended charts. Usually 9 times out of 10 what you're going to want to use is in here. We'll go with the line graph, and one of the things I'm going to do right away is resize this so that the line is a little bit steeper and easier to look at. Interpreting this right away, I can see that the blue data started out above the orange data, and our axis here is representing temperature, so this was a little bit hotter than the orange. And as time went on, the x-axis is showing seconds here. That blue line actually crossed the orange line right around here and remained below it pretty much the entire time. So just interpreting what that would mean is that even though this was a hotter trial here, it cooled off quicker and ended up at a cooler temperature by the end. That was in fact the coffee cup that had the heat sink in it, so I can kind of see visually right away with a qualitative assessment that that was effective. But we want to be a little bit more rigorous here and help that trend be more visible. So one thing that pops out of me right away is all this unused part of the graph. My temperature never gets below 30, so I really don't need all this. I'm going to change that by double clicking on the numbers of the axis over here, the vertical axis. It pops up my little formatting box. I'm going to be in the options here that are the bar graphs on the side. If that doesn't automatically go there, go over to the axis options. And if this isn't expanded, make sure you expand it so you can see we're able to change those bounds. So the minimum on the graph is 0 right now, but again, my data doesn't go below 30, so I'm going to make that new minimum be 30. And we see that looks a lot cleaner right now. I also noticed that my highest data values are somewhere between 55 and 60. So playing it safe, I'll take a little bit more than halfway between those and say 58 as a value there. So now my data actually is spread out and kind of filling up the whole area of the graph, which is much better. Close that out. Other good things we should do here, you should always give it a good title, and Excel knows that, so it makes a default for us here that we can add a title if we want something different than just chart title. And I just double clicked in there, selected the data, and I can make it something like Heatsink experiment or something even more descriptive of what was in the two lines there. So I could say Heatsink versus no heatsink or something like that. The next thing I want to do to my chart so that it's easy for anybody just glancing at it to interpret is label what these units are and what dimensions these are representing. So what are the dimensions and what are the units that dimension is being measured in? The dimensions represented on the vertical axis is the temperature, and that's in degrees Celsius. So I'm going to actually put that in text somewhere over here, like a good graph should. And you can get that up in the ribbon again under the chart options. So if you're not actually clicked on the chart, you're going to be searching in that ribbon and not see any of the chart options there. So make sure you've actually selected the chart that you want to modify. Over here you've got the ability to add common chart elements. And what I was just saying I need is titles on my axes. So we were looking at the vertical on the left to begin with. Let's start there. Just clicking that box will drop in a text box there, and just like I edited the title, I can click in here, select all the text. I just use Control A to select everything in there and add our own text. So I'm going to call this temperature. And indicate that the units are in Celsius just by putting a capital C in parentheses behind it. Similarly, on this axis, I'm going to go up to the chart options, axis title, and the horizontal. This was time, and because I had a 1 second delay between each data point, these numbers are accurately representing the amount of time that has passed in seconds. So the dimension is time. In parentheses, I'll indicate that it was measured in seconds. Great. Last thing here, the series, or like the key, the legends down here, we can give those more descriptive names. So they're just saying Series 1 and Series 2. And I know from my setup and then looking at what data and I printed out to the serial monitor from the Arduino, that the blue line here is representing the coffee mug that had the heatsink in it. So I can change those names of the series. They make this a little bit more confusing. I'm not sure if there's a better way to do it. But if you right click on them, well, first of all, if you try to double click on them, you see you can't change those names directly. So instead of that, I'll right click down there and you'll go up to the select data option that comes up in the right click menu. Here I can click on Series 1 or Series 2 and edit them one by one. So Series 1 is the blue. That's my experiment with the heatsink. So I'm going to edit this, and in another pop-up menu you can change the name. So I'll call this with heatsink, and in the second series I'll edit that and call that without heatsink. And now we're all done. I'll say OK. Now this makes a nice little key down there for helping people to interpret what the colors represent. That should do it in terms of the basic properties of the graph. You can of course explore other options like having this not be a white background or changing your text, adding shadowing, but a good graph should have all these basic features. Use up all your white space, have a title, label the axes, indicate the units, and if you've got more than one line, have some kind of legend to indicate what they are. To get this into a report later on, you could just right click and copy the entire thing, paste it into OneNote or a Word document. You could also use the snipping tool if you wanted to take another JPEG image of this by using that.